Do you ever believe a single wrong turn, a stupid GPS glitch, could be fate tearing down your life? I believed in him. I believed in our 10 years of a perfect marriage, until a rainy Tuesday afternoon in Denver, when I saw my infertile husband picking up a child and kissing her mother goodbye. My name is Maya. I'm 38 years old, and I design buildings meant to last a century. I'm the one who reads the structural reports, who understands that the integrity of a foundation is everything. What a joke. The meeting at Terraform Designs had been brutal. 3 hours of clients trying to slash a budget, arguing over load-bearing walls and LEED certifications. All I wanted was to get home, to pour a glass of wine, and to sink into the quiet comfort of the life I had built with David. The sky over Denver had ripped open. Rain was coming down in solid gray sheets, so heavy the wipers on my Audi couldn't keep pace. I was crawling through rush-hour traffic, my shoulders tight with a headache that had been building since noon. Then, the calm, synthetic voice of my GPS cut through the drumming of the rain, recalculating. I hit the steering wheel with the heel of my hand. You have got to be kidding me. It was directing me off the highway, onto a series of side streets through Washington Park. It was a beautiful neighborhood, all looming maples and old brick Tudors, but it was not the fast way home. It was the long way, the scenic route I never took. Frustrated, I picked up my phone to call David, to tell him I'd be late. It rang, once, twice, 3 times, then clicked to his perfectly polished voicemail. Hi, you've reached David. I'm likely in a meeting or helping a client at Future Path Fund. Leave a message. I clicked off, tossing the phone onto the passenger seat. He was always in a meeting. His dedication to that nonprofit was a thing of legend, a quality I had always admired. I was stopped at a red light, the wipers thwacking a frantic rhythm, when I saw it. Tucked between a minivan and a Range Rover, parked just outside the wrought iron gates of Crestmore Academy, was David's car, a dark blue Volvo. There was no mistaking it. I'd helped him pick it out. My heart did a strange, stupid little kick. What was he doing here? Crestmore was a private elementary school, miles from his downtown office. He'd told me this morning, over coffee, that he was back-to-back with donor meetings all day. The light turned green. Horns blared behind me. I didn't move. Then, instinctively, I pulled a sharp right, bumping the curb as I swerved into a parking spot on the opposite side of the street. I cut the engine, and the sudden silence, broken only by the rain, felt deafening. I just watched. My breath fogged the cold glass. The grand oak doors of the academy swung open, and he walked out. David, my David, wearing the charcoal wool coat I'd bought him for Christmas. He wasn't alone. His hand was wrapped around the much smaller hand of a little girl. She looked to be about 6 years old, maybe 7, with a bright pink backpack that looked too big for her. She skipped once, splashing in a puddle, and looked up at him, laughing. I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just that he was with a child. It was the child herself. She had his hair, that same dark chestnut color, and even from across the street, I could see her smile. It was David's smile. It was the exact, devastating replica of his smile, the one that had made me fall in love with him 10 years ago. A woman followed them out, blonde, elegant, wrapped in a trench coat. She smiled, and David smiled back. They looked, for all the world, like a family, the perfect, happy family. My mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation. A colleague's daughter, a child from the fund. Then, David leaned in. He pulled the blonde woman close. He kissed her. It wasn't a friendly peck. It wasn't a polite, social kiss. It was deep, and it was passionate. It was a kiss that said, "I'll see you at home." He held her face in his hands, just like he held mine. My phone, which I had apparently picked up, slipped from my numb fingers. It hit the floor mat with a dull, plastic thud. I watched as he opened the back door of the Volvo for the little girl, buckling her in. He gave the woman one last squeeze on the arm before walking around to the driver's side. I sat there, frozen, as his car pulled away from the curb, its red taillights disappearing into the rain. The entire solid structure of my life, the foundation I had built my world upon, had just turned to dust. I don't remember the drive home. I must have stopped at red lights. I must have signaled. My body, the shell of Maya, knew how to operate a vehicle while my mind was back on that rain-soaked street, watching that kiss. 10 years. My memory unspooled, not as a comfort, but as an indictment. I saw the night we met. It was a charity gala for the Future Path Fund. I was there with a client. David was on stage. He was mesmerizing. He spoke with such conviction about helping families in need, about building a better future. He was handsome, yes, but it was his perceived goodness, his dedication, that drew me in. He was the founder and manager of a nonprofit, a man who lived to help others. He was solid. He was the foundation. Our life together was built on that image. He was my greatest supporter. When Terraform Designs made me a senior partner, David was the one who threw the party, bragging to everyone that his wife was the most brilliant architect in Denver. He listened to my frustrations about zoning laws and impossible clients, always offering the steady, calm perspective that I lacked. The cornerstone of our marriage, the thing that had bonded us in fire, was our shared sorrow. We couldn't have children. We had endured years of it. The clinical coldness of IVF clinics, the endless needles, the hormone treatments that left me feeling hollowed out and frantic. We spent a fortune. We invested 5 years of hope. And then, the final verdict from the specialist. It wasn't me. It was David. A rare condition. Sterile. The diagnosis was absolute. I remembered holding him. This strong, capable man, my rock, just shattered. He was devastated, or so I thought. He was so ashamed, so broken. I remember him crying in my arms, right there in the sterile white office, saying he had failed me. "It's enough just having you, Maya," he whispered, his voice thick. "As long as I have you, I'm whole." I believed him. I packed away my own desire for motherhood, that deep, primal ache. I put it in a box and buried it because he was my family. He was enough. The lie of it, the sheer audacity, burned like acid in my throat. That little girl with his eyes, she looked to be about 6. I pulled into the garage. The house was bright, warm. The smell of garlic and basil wafted from the kitchen. He was there. David, my husband, stood at the kitchen island, humming along to some jazz station, stirring a pot of sauce. He looked up as I walked in, his face breaking into that familiar, loving smile, the smile that was a lie. "Hey, you," he said, his voice warm. "You're late. I was just about to call. Sorry I missed you earlier. That donor meeting went on forever." He was flawless. The transition from his other life to this one was seamless. Not a flicker of guilt, not a hint of the rain he'd been standing in. "You look exhausted, Maya," he said, walking over, wiping his hands on a towel. From the adjoining den, a soft, rhythmic beeping, the sound of a medical monitor. "Marcus is settled," David said, his voice dropping into that register of practiced compassion. "He was a little agitated today, but he's resting now." Marcus, David's older brother. The living, breathing proof of David's sainthood, Marcus lived with us. He was confined to a wheelchair, a victim. David had told me of a horrific car accident 10 years ago that left him paralyzed and severely brain damaged. David was his sole caretaker. David fed him, bathed him, managed his complex medications. It was our cross to bear, David always said, but he bore it with such grace. The world saw him as a hero, a man tending to his broken brother while running a charity. I saw him as a saint. David leaned in to kiss me. Tough day. His lips brushed my cheek. I could smell the wine on his breath, the sauce on his clothes, and underneath it all, the faint, phantom scent of the blonde woman's perfume. I flinched. I disguised it as a shiver. I'm just cold. The rain. I looked at him, really looked at him, searching for the man I saw on the street. But he was gone. Only David, my perfect, loving husband, remained. He was a stranger wearing the face of the man I loved. The shock that had paralyzed me in the car was finally receding, replaced by something else, something cold, something sharp. I am an architect. I do not panic when I find a structural flaw. I analyze the problem, I find the weak points, and I draw up a new set of plans. I think I'm just going to take a bath, I said, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. I have a terrible headache. Of course, honey, he said, his brow furrowing with perfect concern. Go. Rest. I can bring you up some food later. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand to know who the child was, who the woman was. But I didn't. You don't confront a liar when you're not ready. You don't let him know you're inspecting the foundation. I walked past him. I could feel his eyes on me, but I didn't look back. The war had already started. He just didn't know it yet. I didn't take a bath. I ran the water, making sure the sound carried down the hall, splashed it around, and then drained the tub. I slipped into bed, the sheets cold against my skin. David was reading. I leaned over and gave him a dry, chaste kiss on the cheek. Headache is still pounding, I whispered. I'm just going to sleep. He bought it. He murmured something sympathetic, his eyes never leaving his book. He turned off his own light maybe 30 minutes later, and the sound of his deep, even breathing soon filled the room, the sleep of a man with no conscience. I lay beside him, my eyes wide open in the dark, staring at the shadows on the ceiling. I was an architect. My entire career was built on seeing what others missed, the load-bearing wall hidden behind drywall, the structural flaw in a blueprint, the potential of an empty space. And yet, I had been living inside a house that was collapsing, and I never felt the tremor. My mind began to excavate. I dug past the perfect facade of the last 10 years and started looking for the cracks, the fundraising trips. They came up so suddenly. A weekend in Aspen, a 3-day conference in Vail that wasn't on his calendar. A last-minute donor opportunity. Maya, I have to go. I'd always admired his dedication. I'd packed his bags, the phone calls, the ones he always took on the balcony, even in the dead of winter. He'd slide the glass door shut, his back to me, his voice a low, confidential murmur. An urgent matter with a donor, he'd say, coming back inside, looking serious. I'd respected his discretion. I'd thought it was about protecting the privacy of the wealthy families who donated to his righteous cause. My stomach clenched. I thought back. About 6 years. That little girl was about 6 years old. 6 years ago. A massive withdrawal from our joint savings account. I'm talking a significant sum, maybe $50,000. When I'd asked, he had looked so ashamed, so crestfallen. It was a failed investment, he'd said. A sure thing tip from a friend that had gone bust. I was trying to surprise you, Maya, he'd said, taking my hands. I wanted to build up our nest egg. I'll earn every cent back, I promise. I had comforted him. I told him it was just money. 6 years. A failed investment that coincided perfectly with the birth of a child who needed a nursery, a stroller, a college fund, a child who was now attending Crestmore Academy, where the tuition alone was probably $30,000 a year, and the adoption, after the infertility diagnosis, after we had grieved for the children we would never have. I had brought it up, maybe a year later. What about adoption? David. His reaction wasn't sadness, it was annoyance. He'd shut it down, gently, but firmly. I'm just not ready for that. Maya, he'd said, the picture of a man still nursing a wound. It's too much right now, with Marcus and the fund. It feels like settling. I just want you. He wasn't ready to adopt a child because he already had one. The realization was a block of ice in my chest. I slipped out of the bed, my feet hitting the cold hardwood. I know the spots on the floor that don't creak. David didn't stir. The house was dark, silent, except for the low, rhythmic beep of Marcus's heart monitor from his room downstairs. I padded down the hall to David's office, his sanctuary. The door was open a crack. I slipped inside, closing it gently behind me, clicking the lock. I sat in his leather chair. The computer screen was black. I touched the mouse, and it hummed to life, illuminating the room with a cold blue glow. The login screen, a password. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I tried the obvious. My birthday. Access denied. Our anniversary. Access denied. The name of his stupid fund. Future Path Fund. Access denied. I sat back, staring at the screen. What was the most important date in his life? What was the event that had defined him, that had made him the saint everyone saw? My fingers moved. I typed in the date of Marcus's accident, 10 years ago. Access granted. The desktop opened. My breath hitched. I wasn't a hacker. I just used the search bar in his files. I typed Crestmore. Nothing. I tried Amelia, the first name that popped into my head. Nothing. I opened his finance folder. It was there, in a subdirectory labeled Personal, Bank Statements. Not our joint account, a separate account, with a bank I didn't recognize. I clicked the most recent statement, and there it was. Transfers, payments, thousands of dollars every month, and a recurring charge, clear as day, Crestmore Academy tuition. The payments went back 6 years. I scrolled, my blood turning to ice. I looked at the deposits into this secret account. They were sporadic, large, lump sums. The source codes weren't from his payroll. This wasn't just his salary. This was too much money. He wasn't just supporting a secret family. He was funding it from somewhere else. The man I married wasn't just an adulterer. He was a thief. He was embezzling. From his own nonprofit. From the donors who trusted him. He was a walking, breathing lie. And I had been his masterpiece. I called Terraform Designs the next morning and told my assistant I had the flu. The real one, the kind that required quarantine. I couldn't go to work. I couldn't leave the house. My investigation was here. My subject was home. "You really sound awful," David said, his voice dripping with sympathy. He'd brought me toast and tea, placing his cool hand on my forehead. "You're burning up." I wasn't. I was cold. But I let him believe it. "Just rest, Maya. Don't worry about a thing. I'll cancel my morning meetings to make sure you're settled." He was a masterpiece. He spent the morning bringing me water, fluffing my pillows, and taking important calls in his office, his voice a low, professional murmur. I watched him. Every kind gesture, every concerned look was a performance. He was playing the role of the devoted husband to me, while downstairs, he played the role of the saintly brother to Marcus. His entire life was a stage play, and he was the star. My attention, however, was shifting. It was moving from the performer to the one silent member of the audience. Marcus. His room was in the West Wing, a small, self-contained suite David had insisted on building. He needs to be with family, he had insisted, and everyone had praised his selflessness. For 10 years, Marcus had been a piece of furniture in our lives, a quiet, tragic fixture in a high-tech wheelchair. He sat, he stared, he was fed, he was medicated. David was the only one who could connect with him. David always said the accident, the one that happened just before David and I got serious, had left him with severe cognitive damage. "He's in there, Maya," David would say. "But he's lost." I'd always accepted it. Why wouldn't I? That afternoon, while David was in his office, I made a cup of chamomile tea. I carried it to Marcus's room. I knocked softly and entered. He was where he always was, in his chair, by the window, staring at the garden. The television was on, some mindless daytime talk show, but his eyes weren't focused on it. They were fixed on a bird feeder outside. "Hi, Marcus," I said softly, as I always did. He didn't turn. A slow, slight tremor in his left hand was his only movement. "I brought you some tea." I placed it on the tray table next to him, near his array of pills, all sorted into a neat little plastic box for the afternoon dose. "David's working. I'm not feeling well today." I sat in the chair opposite him. The room smelled of antiseptic and the faint, powdery scent of medication. "Marcus." I leaned forward, my voice barely a whisper. "Do you know what David is doing?" "Nothing." Not a flicker. He just stared at the window, his profile rigid. His eyes were what David always said they were: empty. A blank, vacant stare that saw nothing. My shoulders slumped. What was I expecting? That this severely disabled man was going to confirm my husband was a monster? I was desperate. I was grabbing at ghosts. My gaze fell on the pill box. Little white ones. Blue capsules. A large yellow tablet. I knew David managed his medication. A complex cocktail. I recognized the blue ones beta blockers. But the white ones I left the tea, went back to my room, and picked up my phone. I searched for the imprints on the pills I had memorized. The results loaded: Seroquel, an antipsychotic, diazepam, a powerful tranquilizer. These weren't just for agitation. This was a cocktail designed to keep someone in a fog. This was a chemical straitjacket. The day dragged on. I played the part of the invalid. David played the part of the nurse. By 10 p.m., he was exhausted from his own performance. "I'm going to take a long, hot shower," he announced, kissing my supposedly feverish head. "Call if you need anything. I waited. I heard the bathroom door click shut, heard the plumbing groan as the water turned on full blast. Then I heard it. David. He was singing. Some upbeat, off-key tune from a band he liked. I slipped out of bed. The house was dark. I moved down the hall, past the stairs. I wasn't going to David's office this time. I was going to Marcus's. I pushed the door open without knocking. It was pitch black. The beep of the heart monitor was the only sound, and he wasn't by the window. My heart hammered. "Marcus!" I took a step in, and my foot hit something. Not the wheelchair. The wheelchair was in its usual spot, but it was empty. A shadow moved by the far window. I fumbled for the light switch. I clicked it on, and I saw him. Marcus. He was standing. He was standing on his own 2 feet, bracing himself with one hand against the windowsill. He was thin, yes, and unsteady, but he was standing. He whipped his head around, his eyes wide. He looked like a cornered animal. He saw me. His eyes. They weren't empty. They weren't vacant. They were sharp. They were intelligent. And they were filled with a profound, bone-chilling terror. He didn't speak. He just lunged, awkwardly, falling back into his wheelchair. He grabbed my wrist with a hand that was surprisingly strong. His fingers dug into my skin. He brought his other hand to his lips, a frantic, desperate shh. Then he pointed up, toward the ceiling, in the direction of our master bathroom. I could hear it, even from here. The muffled sound of running water and the faint, terrible sound of my husband, happily singing. I stared at him. The man in the wheelchair was a stranger, and the man I'd seen standing was gone, replaced by a trembling, terrified creature. His grip on my wrist was a vice. The sound of David singing, so carefree, so monstrously normal, echoed from upstairs. Marcus's other hand scrambled for the notepad on his bedside table. He grabbed the pen, his knuckles white, and his hand flew across the paper in a jagged, desperate scrawl. He poisons me. I looked from the note to the pillbox on his tray, the chemical fog. It wasn't to help him. It was to bury him. He doesn't want me to talk. My voice was a dry croak. Talk. I whispered, my eyes darting to the closed door. We were on borrowed time. The shower was still running. Talk about what? Marcus. His eyes were wild. He listened, straining for any change in the sound from upstairs. He ripped the page from the pad, his movements jerky, and started again, pressing the pen so hard it tore the paper. The accident. The accident. I stammered, confused. But you were hurt. David said your brain. He shook his head, a violent, angry motion. He crumpled the paper in his fist. He wrote again, his hand flying, underlining the words, "Not an accident." David cut my brakes. The words hung in the air, refusing to make sense. Cut his brakes. David. My David. The man who ran a charity. The man who cried during our infertility treatments. The man who gently spoon-fed his brother. It was impossible, but the man in front of me, the man who was not paralyzed, the man who was not brain damaged, was the truth. The man upstairs, singing in the shower, was the lie. Why? I knelt by the chair, my own body trembling. Marcus, why? He began to write, his hand flying. It wasn't just words, it was a dam breaking. 10 years of silence, 10 years of a living burial pouring onto the page in frantic blue ink. He wrote, he gestured, his face contorting with a decade of suppressed rage. He told me about 10 years ago, before me, before the accident. Marcus, it turned out, was the brilliant one. He had been the one who ran the family's original, highly successful investment fund. He had built it from nothing. David was the charismatic screw-up, the playboy brother, always charming, always in debt, always looking for the next handout. He was stealing from me. Marcus wrote, the words sharp, a lot. David had been embezzling, skimming massive amounts from the family fund to cover his gambling debts and lavish lifestyle. I found it. I confronted him. I told him I was going to the police. Marcus's face was a mask of old pain. He had threatened to turn his own brother in. The next day, the drive to the mountains, no brakes. My hand flew to my mouth. The accident wasn't an accident. It was an execution. It just failed. But you survived. I breathed. He nodded, a bitter, jerky motion. He had survived, but barely. His legs were shattered, his spine damaged, but his mind was clear. In the hospital, he had started to recover. He had started to talk. And that's when David stepped in. He took control. My grieving brother. Marcus wrote. He managed my care. He told the doctors I was confused from the crash, paranoid. When Marcus threatened to expose him from his hospital bed, the medication started, the sedatives, the antipsychotics. David had systematically, medically, induced the very brain damage he told the world was caused by the crash. He had imprisoned his brother in his own body. And the sainthood, the devotion, it was all a show, a cover. David used the shell of the brother he'd tried to murder as his ultimate alibi, his greatest performance of compassion. The fund, I whispered, the final dark piece clicking into place. Future path. Marcus looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a spark of something other than fear. It was a cold, pure hatred. He laughed, a horrifying, dry, rasping sound from a throat that hadn't been used in years. He snatched the pad. My money. He started Future Path with the money he stole from me. My fund. It was all a lie. All of it. He laundered the money he'd stolen, the money he'd tried to kill for, through a charity. He built his entire spotless reputation on the grave he had tried to dig for his own brother. Suddenly, the water upstairs stopped. The singing cut off. The silence that fell over the house was absolute, heavy, and terrifying. Marcus froze. In one frantic movement, he tore the pages from the notepad, shoved the crumpled confessions deep into the cushion of his wheelchair, and his entire body changed. His face went slack. His eyes went dull and vacant. The intelligent, terrified man was gone. In his place was the empty, broken shell I had always known. He slumped in his chair, his hand resuming its slight, familiar tremor. I scrambled to my feet, backing toward the door. I heard the click of the bathroom door opening upstairs, footsteps on the hardwood floor. I had come down here thinking my husband was an adulterer and an embezzler. I was wrong. I was married to a monster, an attempted murderer, and I was trapped in this house with him. My terror was a physical thing, a heavy weight pressing on my chest, but underneath it, something else was solidifying. Rage. The cold, precise anger of an architect who just discovered her prize building was constructed on a sinkhole. I was not going to let it collapse. I was going to demolish it on my own terms. The next morning, I was still sick. When David brought me his morning pill box, I palmed the heavy sedatives. "David, honey, I'm so weak. Could you get me some more water?" The moment he left, I flushed them. I went to the pharmacy. I bought sugar pills, a bottle of magnesium citrate. I spent 2 hours in my own bathroom, crushing them, mixing them, and refilling the capsules. It was meticulous, painstaking work. That afternoon, I brought Marcus his medication. Shh! David was on a long conference call, his office door shut. I walked into Marcus's room, my hands shaking. I held out the plastic cup with the pills. He looked at me, his eyes dead. The performance. I didn't move. I just held them out. Slowly, his eyes focused. He looked at the pills, then at me. I gave a single, almost imperceptible shake of my head. He understood. He took the cup, and for the first time, he was the one taking the placebo. I leaned in, my mouth close to his ear. "I will get you out of this," I whispered. "I promise." Our communication became a silent, dangerous ballet. David was in the house, a benevolent warden, but his ego made him sloppy. He believed his own performance. He couldn't imagine his sick wife and his broken brother could be a threat. We used a small notepad. I would go to Marcus's room to read to him. David found it touching. "You're so good to him, Maya." While the audiobook played, I would write. "What do we do?" He would take the pen, his hand still weak but growing steadier by the day. "We need a lawyer." I would rip the page out, take it to the bathroom, and flush it down the toilet. My flu gave me an excuse. "David, I have to go to the doctor. I'm not getting better." The doctor was Mrs. Holland, the most ruthless divorce attorney in Denver. Her office was all steel, glass, and white orchids. She was a woman who did not lose. I sat across from her polished mahogany desk. "Mrs. Holland," I started, my voice clear and cold. "I am here for a divorce, but it's more than that." I told her everything, the GPS, the child, the kiss, the secret bank account. She nodded, unimpressed. This was her Tuesday. Then I told her about Marcus. Her pen stopped moving. I told her about the sedatives, the accident, the cut breaks, the 10 years of a living burial, the fund built on stolen money. When I finished, she was silent for a full minute. She took off her glasses. "Mrs. Calloway," she said, her voice dropping. "What you are describing is not a divorce proceeding. It is a criminal case, attempted murder, kidnapping, massive financial fraud." She leaned forward. "But right now, you have nothing. You have the word of a man your husband has successfully portrayed as severely brain damaged for a decade. He will say you are unstable, grieving the infertility. He will say Marcus is confused. He will paint you as the villain. We need proof. Undeniable, catastrophic proof." I went home. The weight of proof sat on me. I went to Marcus. The audiobook was on. I wrote, "A lawyer says we have nothing. We need proof he tried to kill you." He stared at the pad. His face was paler, but his eyes were burning. The fog was lifting, and the rage was coming to the surface. He wrote, "The safe." "What safe?" I whispered. "His office. Behind the Rauschenberg print. His insurance. The code." He looked at me, his lip curling in a grimace. "The date he killed me." My accident. The problem was David. He was always there. I couldn't get into that office. I couldn't move the painting. I sat in the living room that night, pretending to read a design magazine, my mind racing. How do you get a meticulous, controlling monster to leave his fortress? You don't attack the fortress. You attack his new, unstable acquisition, Amelia. I had bought a burner phone on my way home from Holland's office. It was in my purse. I went to the guest bathroom, locked the door, and turned on the fan. My fingers were shaking, but my mind was clear. I typed the text. I didn't need to be cruel. I just needed to be true. David is playing you. He never had any intention of leaving his wife. He's a liar. I hit send. I waited. It took maybe 10 minutes. I was back in the living room, flipping a page I hadn't read, when David's phone rang. It wasn't his usual ring. It was the urgent, private line. He picked it up from his desk. "Huh, hello." I watched him from across the hall. I saw his back stiffen. "What? That's insane. Where did you hear that?" His voice was low, placating, but I could hear the edge of panic. "Amelia, calm down. You're not making any sense." "No, I can't." "I told you, my wife is sick. Don't be hysterical." There was a pause. I heard a muffled sound. He was listening, and he was not happy. "Do not call me at this number again," he hissed, and hung up. He didn't move for a minute. Then the phone buzzed again. A text, and again, and again. He let out a short, sharp, "Damn it." He burst out of his office, grabbing his car keys from the bowl by the door. His face was a mask of fury, the perfect husband gone. "Maya," he shouted, not even looking at me. "It's an emergency with the fund. A major donor is threatening to pull out. It's a mess. I have to go fix it." "Oh no," I said, my voice full of fake, sleepy concern. "Will you be late?" "I'll be home when I'm home," he snapped. The front door slammed shut. The sound echoed in the sudden silence. I stood up. I walked to Marcus's room. He was already at the door, out of his chair. He was wobbly, using the doorframe for support. But he was standing. His eyes were clear, and they were full of fire. "He's gone," I said. "Let's go." Marcus rasped, his voice a dry, unused whisper. The house was dead silent. I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears. Marcus was leaning heavily on me, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. His legs were stronger than before, but 10 years of atrophy and sedation had taken their toll. It took us what felt like an eternity to cross the hall to David's office. I locked the door behind us. "The print," I said. It was a huge, abstract Rauschenberg print, one of David's favorites. It cost more than my first condo. I went to lift it, but it was bolted. "No," Marcus rasped, his voice a dry croak. He pointed to the bottom right corner, a tiny, almost invisible seam. It was on a hinge. I pulled, and the entire painting swung away from the wall, silent as a grave, revealing the dark gray metal of a built-in safe. I turned to Marcus. He was slumped against the desk, sweating, but his eyes were alive. "The code," I said. His fingers fumbled. He mimed typing in the air, his voice cracking. 10, 17, 10. October 17th, 10 years ago, the day of his accident, the day David had tried to murder him. My fingers were trembling so badly I had to try twice. I keyed in the numbers, 10, 17, 10. A heavy clunk. The handle clicked. I pulled the heavy door open. It wasn't full of cash, like I'd expected. It was organized, meticulous. Files, a few stacks of bonds, and a small black external hard drive. "That's it," Marcus said, pointing. "His whole life." I grabbed the drive, shoving the cable into his laptop, which I'd brought from my office. "What are we looking for?" "Everything," he breathed. The drive mounted. It was password protected. I looked at Marcus. "The same?" He nodded. I typed it in. 10:01:17 Access granted. Folders. Dozens of them. Future Path Fund. Personal. Contingency. I clicked Contingency first. A subfolder, Travel. I opened it. My blood ran cold. Scanned images. 3 passports. Not for David and Maya Calloway. For David Miller. For Amelia Miller. And for Lily Miller. New identities. They were prepared to run. "He was leaving," I whispered. "He was going to leave me." "He was leaving everyone," Marcus said, pointing at another folder. Cayman transfers. I clicked. It was all there. Wire transfer authorizations. Signed by David. Moving millions of dollars from the Future Path Fund to an offshore account. He was gutting his own charity. He was planning to clean it out and vanish. "He's a thief," I said. But Marcus was shaking his head, pointing at another folder. "No," he rasped. "He's a killer. Look, M Archive." I opened it. There was only one file inside, an audio file. I clicked play. The sound of a hospital, the faint, steady beep of a monitor, and then David's voice, my husband's voice, but not as I knew it. It was cold. It was flat. "You're tougher than I thought. Marcus, you just wouldn't let go. Would you?" Then a low, terrible moan. "Marcus, you should have died in that crash." David's voice continued, a calm, conversational poison. "It would have been so much cleaner, but this works too. Don't worry, big brother, I'll take care of you. You'll live, but you'll live like you are dead. You will never speak again." The recording clicked off. I was frozen. It was the smoking gun, the undeniable, catastrophic proof that Mrs. Holland had demanded. "There's one more," Marcus whispered, pointing to a file I'd missed, in the root directory. Paternity. I opened it. A single scanned document from a DNA lab in Denver. My eyes scanned the page. Participant David Calloway. Participant Lily Miller. And the result, in cold scientific text, probability of paternity 0%. David Calloway is excluded as the biological father. I stared at it. He's not the father. My mind reeled. David was sterile. The diagnosis was real. That child wasn't his. He had been so obsessed with having the perfect family, the one he couldn't have, that he had stolen one. He was conning the con artists. He was lying to his mistress. I grabbed the hard drive, yanking the cable from the laptop. I grabbed the small digital audio recorder that was also in the safe, the one the recording had likely been made with. I had to get this to Holland. And then it happened. The sudden, ear-splitting shriek of the house security system. A voice blared from the keypad downstairs. "Alarm! Front door! Alarm!" David. He was back. He must have realized. The call with Amelia wasn't a real emergency. He'd seen the trap. "Marcus," I screamed. He was already moving, scrambling, his body collapsing in on itself. He lunged for the wheelchair, falling into it, a grotesque transformation. He pulled the blanket over his legs, his face instantly going slack, his eyes rolling up, his hand resuming its pathetic, practiced tremor. He became the broken brother in 2 seconds. I slammed the safe door shut. I didn't have time to spin the dial. I just slammed it. I shoved the hard drive and the audio recorder into the waistband of my pants, pulling my sweater down over them, just as I heard the front door crash open and his footsteps pounding up the stairs. "Maya!" he roared. He knew. The office door burst open, slamming against the wall with a crack. David stood in the doorway, his chest heaving. The perfectly tailored suit was soaked from the rain, his hair plastered to his forehead. The mask was gone. The saint, the loving husband, the philanthropist, all of it had burned away. All that was left was the monster. His eyes were not the warm brown I had loved. They were black, frantic, and filled with a cold, pure rage. "What did you do, Maya?" he hissed, his voice a low growl I had never heard before. The meeting. There was no meeting. It was a trap. His eyes darted around the room. He was a predator scanning for threats. He saw me, standing frozen. He saw Marcus, slumped in his chair, drooling slightly, a perfect performance. And then he saw the painting. It was hanging crooked by an inch, and the safe door, which I had slammed but not locked, was not quite flush. It was open, just a crack. "No," he whispered. It was a sound of disbelief, of utter ruin. His eyes found mine. "What did you take?" He lunged. He crossed the room in 2 strides, his hands reaching for me, grabbing at my sweater, his fingers digging for the hard drive he knew I must have. "You've ruined everything. Everything I built," I screamed, a raw, primal sound, and shoved him back with all my strength. The hard drive and the recorder bit into my skin. He stumbled, surprised by my resistance, but recovered instantly. He came at me again, snarling, one hand grabbing my hair, the other clawing at my waist. "Give it to me, Maya." "Marcus," I shrieked. With my free hand, I ripped the drive and the recorder from my waistband and threw them, skittering across the floor, toward the wheelchair. "Catch!" They landed near his feet. David saw the movement. He let go of me, shoving me hard against the desk. The sharp edge of the wood bit into my spine. He turned, his entire body vibrating with a rage that was almost biblical. He looked at Marcus, at the broken man in the chair, who was now staring, wide-eyed and terrified, at the piece of plastic on the floor. "You," David breathed, his voice dropping to a terrifying calm. "It was you. You did this. You talked." He stalked toward the wheelchair. Marcus flinched, playing the part of the helpless invalid, his hands trembling as he stared at his brother. "All these years," David said, his voice a sick, mock-sympathetic croon as he circled the chair. "All these years I fed you. I cleaned you. I kept you alive when I should have just finished the job." He stopped in front of the desk, his eyes landing on the heavy bronze statue, a modern art piece I'd given him, an abstract figure of a man reaching for the sky. "You dared to talk to her!" he roared. He snatched the statue from the desk. It was heavy, a solid 20 pounds of metal. He raised it high above his head with both hands. "This time, Marcus," he screamed, his face purple. "I will kill you for real." He was coming down with the statue, aiming for his brother's skull, and I knew I was too far away. I couldn't stop it. This was it. Then, the climax. Just as David's arms began their downward swing, Marcus's hand shot out. Not the trembling, weak hand of an invalid, but a hand that was fast and strong, fueled by 10 years of locked-in rage. He didn't grab the statue. He grabbed David's knee and pushed. It was a perfectly executed move. David, all his weight and momentum committed to the kill, was completely unbalanced. He went down, hard. He crashed sideways onto the hardwood floor, the heavy statue flying from his grip and smashing into the leg of the desk, gouging the wood. David lay there, stunned. The wind knocked out of him. He stared at Marcus, who was now slowly, deliberately, picking the hard drive up from the floor. And in that same frozen second of silence, a new sound cut through the night. It was distant at first, then closer, growing impossibly loud, the high-low wail of sirens. Not one, many. They were on our street. They were in our driveway. I was leaning against the desk, my hand still clutching my phone. I had pressed the call button, the speed dial to 911, the second I heard his car pull up. I hadn't even said a word. I'd just left the line open. They'd heard everything. The threats, the confession, the assault. David heard them. His head snapped toward the window, where the flashing red and blue lights were already painting the walls in a grotesque, pulsing light. He was trapped. He looked at me, his wife, the architect, the fool he thought he had. He looked at Marcus, the brother he'd tried to bury, who was now sitting upright in his chair, holding the evidence that would destroy him. The fight was gone. The rage was gone. He didn't try to run. He didn't cry. He didn't beg. He just looked at us, his chest still heaving, a strange, awful smile spreading across his face. He laughed, a cold, quiet, terrible sound that chilled me more than his rage ever could. The laugh of a man who had lost everything and found it funny. It has been 1 week. 1 week of living in a hotel suite under a false name, protected by Mrs. Holland's security. 1 week of Marcus in a private medical facility. Finally, agonizingly, detoxing from 10 years of chemical bondage. David was out on bail. His lawyers were the best in the state, and they had spun the story with sickening precision. He hadn't assaulted me. He hadn't tried to kill his brother. No, David Calloway, the city's philanthropist, had been the victim. He'd been forced to restrain his mentally unstable and violent brother during a tragic psychotic episode. I, his loving but hysterical wife, had misunderstood the situation and called 911 in a panic. The assault charge was flimsy. For now, the hard drive and the recorder, the real evidence, were safe with Mrs. Holland. They were our bomb. David was under a temporary restraining order. He was forbidden from coming within 500 yards of me or Marcus, but the monster was still holding his party. The Future Path Fund annual gala, the single most important event on his social calendar, was still on. He hadn't canceled. He couldn't. His entire performance depended on it. His donors, the source of his stolen money, were all going to be there. Mrs. Holland's investigators had discovered he was planning to flee the country in less than 72 hours. This gala was his last-ditch effort to secure a final round of massive donations before he emptied the Cayman accounts and disappeared with Amelia and her child. My name was on the invitation, etched in gold leaf. Hosted by David and Maya Calloway. He couldn't stop me from coming. To disavow his wife, the co-host, the night of the event, it would raise too many questions. He was trapped by his own charade. I walked into the grand ballroom of the Brown Palace Hotel alone. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the murmur of hundreds of conversations. I had chosen my dress with architectural precision. It was blood red, high-necked, and severe, a structure of silk and anger. I was not a grieving wife. I was a declaration of war. I saw him. He was near the stage, a glass of champagne in his hand, already holding court. He looked magnificent in his tuxedo, the picture of charm and confidence. He was laughing, his head tilted back, and then he saw me. The laugh died in his throat. The smile froze, just for a second. The mask almost slipped, and she was there, clinging to his arm as if for life. Amelia, the blonde mistress. She looked terrified, pale under her heavy makeup, her eyes darting nervously to every face in the crowd. She was a woman who knew she was on a sinking ship but was too scared to jump. David recovered instantly. He whispered something to Amelia and began to move toward me, his face a mask of pained, loving concern. The worried husband performance. "Maya, darling," he started, his arms half open, ready for the embrace that would reassure the crowd. I didn't slow down. I looked at him, through him, as if he were a pane of glass, and walked directly past him toward the bar. I picked up a glass of sparkling water. I could feel his gaze on my back, a wave of pure, homicidal fury. I turned, leaning against a marble pillar, and surveyed my room. It wasn't just filled with Denver's elite. It was filled with our allies. Near the back, blending in perfectly in a dark blue evening gown, was Mrs. Holland. She wasn't just a lawyer, she was a shark, and this was her water. She raised her glass to me in a silent, predatory toast, standing near the audio-visual booth, disguised as hotel event staff, were two men I didn't recognize, and scattered in the crowd, posing as wealthy donors, were two financial investigators from the DA's office. They were guests tonight. They were here to witness the fall. The lights began to dim. A hush fell over the crowd. David, his composure regained, walked onto the stage, stepping up to the podium. The applause was thunderous. He smiled, a humble, godlike smile. He gripped the sides of the podium, his anchor pose I had seen him practice. "Thank you," he said, his voice, rich and resonant, filling the room. "Thank you all for being here, your support. It means the world." He paused, looking out over the faces. "In this life, we are faced with challenges, but I have always believed, as Future Path has always shown, that there is no greater currency than trust. There is no greater calling than compassion." He was talking about trust. The man who had tried to murder his brother. The man who was wanted to steal millions of dollars. I looked at Mrs. Holland. She was watching me. David took a breath, preparing for his grand finale. "Because when we trust in each other." I gave a single, slow nod. It was time. "Trust in our shared future," David was saying, his voice swelling with false passion. That's when the giant screen behind him, the one displaying the smiling logo of the Future Path Fund, flickered. It went dark for a second, and then it changed. It wasn't the logo. It was a scanned image. 3 passports. David Miller, Amelia Miller, Lily Miller. A confused murmur rippled through the ballroom. People in the front rows turned to look at the screen, then back at David, confused. David's voice faltered. He stopped, mid-sentence. He looked over his shoulder at the screen, and his face, projected onto 2 other screens flanking the stage, went absolutely white. He knew what those were. He knew he was caught. He tapped the microphone, a nervous, jerky movement. "We seem to be having a technical..." But no sound came from the mic. Instead, a new sound filled the ballroom, a cold, clear, recorded voice. His voice. "You're tougher than I thought. Marcus, you just wouldn't let go. Would you?" The audience gasped. David clawed at the podium, his knuckles white. Near the entrance, I saw Amelia. Her face was a mask of pure terror. She turned, her heels slipping on the polished floor, and tried to run, tried to bolt for the door. She didn't get 2 steps before a well-dressed woman, Mrs. Holland's private investigator, stepped calmly in front of her, blocking her path. The audio recording continued, echoing in the dead silence. "You should have died in that crash. It would have been so much cleaner. You'll live, but you'll live like you are dead." David was frozen, a statue of his own guilt. And then, from the side of the ballroom, a new movement. The crowd parted. A wheelchair was moving toward the stage, but it was empty. Beside it, walking slowly, unsteadily, but with a terrifying, righteous purpose, was Marcus. He was wearing a black tuxedo. He was pale, and he was thin, but he was walking. He walked past the front tables, past the gasping donors, and he walked right up the stairs to the stage. David stared at him, his mouth open, his mind clearly unable to process the reality of his brother, standing. Marcus, his face set like stone, walked directly to his brother. He reached out and calmly took the microphone from David's paralyzed hand. Marcus looked out at the sea of shocked faces. He took a deep, shuddering breath. "My brother," he said, and his voice, though rough from 10 years of disuse, was clear and amplified, "is a liar." David lunged, a desperate, last-second attempt to stop him, but Marcus just held up a hand. No, David, no more. My brother, Marcus continued, turning to the crowd, is a liar, an embezzler, and an attempted murderer. 10 years ago, he cut the brakes on my car because I discovered he was stealing from our family. He left me for dead. When I survived, he spent a decade poisoning me with sedatives, keeping me a prisoner in my own body, to silence me. As he spoke, the screen behind him changed again. The passports were gone. In their place, the bank statements, the wire transfers to the Cayman Islands. The Future Path Fund, Marcus said, his voice dripping with 10 years of cold fury, was a lie. It was built with the money he stole from me. He has been stealing from all of you. The crowd was in an uproar. People were standing, shouting. And his new family, Marcus said, and his eyes found Amelia, who was now weeping, held by the investigator. The screen changed one last time. It was the DNA report. Probability of paternity 0%. He was even lying to his mistress, Marcus finished. The child he was pretending was his isn't. That was the final signal, as if summoned by the revelation. Every single exit door to the ballroom swung open. But it wasn't guests leaving. It was police, uniformed officers, detectives in suits. They flooded the room, their movements calm, practiced. 2 of them were on the stage. They moved past Marcus. They moved toward David. "David Calloway," one of them said, his voice loud. "You are under arrest." David didn't resist. He just stood there, his arms limp, as they pulled his hands behind his back and the sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs echoed through the ballroom. I stood by my pillar. I didn't move. I watched as they led him, the great man, the philanthropist, my husband, off the stage and through the chaotic, shouting crowd. His eyes, for 1 second, found mine. They were empty, not of rage or sadness, just empty. He was a hollow structure, and I had finally, permanently, demolished him. He was gone. I looked across the room, to the stage. Marcus was standing there, shaking, leaning on the podium, but he was standing. He looked at me. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just nodded. Once. The foundation was clear. The war was over. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please, let me know where you're listening from in the comments. I'd love to connect and hear your thoughts. Subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and give us your support by hitting that hype button so more people can hear this story.